Jordan Whittington has his breakout game. Tank Bigsby probably took the running back one slot from Travis Etienne this week. And you have T. Higgins and Jamar Chase combining for like 60 points. It was a pretty entertaining week, but let's start with Jordan Whittington. Jordan Whittington had 10 targets today. He caught 7 of those. He had 89 yards in half PPR leagues. This was 12.5 points, 15 points in full point PPR leagues. But you're encouraged by this because this is an offense that has been pretty wide open for a while now, right? You saw Cooper Kupp get hurt. You saw Puka Nacua get hurt. And everybody assumed that Jordan Whittington would step in and eventually get some work. Now what you've seen is he actually is getting a fair amount of targets. He did get the double-digit targets that a lot of people were predicting, and he is a viable waiver pickup from now on moving forward. We'll talk about that later in the video, but his breakout was one of the biggest storylines this week.
Yeah, and Tank Bigsby was another huge one. This was a super high-scoring game. It ended up being, which was surprising, honestly, going into the fourth quarter for Jacksonville and Indy, but Etienne is pretty much effectively off the field going into the fourth quarter. Tank Bigsby gets a ton of the usage. Part of that is they were trying to run out the clock, but Bigsby capitalizes. He out-carries Etienne 13-6. He gets 100 rushing yards, and yes, half of that came from a breakaway run for a touchdown, but it doesn't matter. Overall, he looks like the better running back there. No, he's not getting the receiving usage like Etienne is, but I'll tell you what, man, this is scaring you for the rest of the season for a guy like Etienne who you invested heavily in the third, fourth round.
Garrett Wilson had 22 targets today. Yes, he only caught 13 of those.
Finally.
He only had 100 yards, but 22 targets. It's clear that they're going to prioritize using Garrett Wilson moving forward. But Garrett Wilson was a guy we were telling you to hold. Now he's actually returning on his value a little bit. Expect Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers to have a good connection moving forward. Obviously, we're going to monitor the ankle injury to Rodgers, but Garrett Wilson looks pretty freaking good.
Yeah, and so did Brandon Aiyuk, who finally, after 4 weeks, was able to produce. Looked like the top option. It wasn't even a question. 12 targets, 147 yards, didn't even haul in a touchdown, still had 19 points dang near in half PPR formats. This is what you drafted him to do, and this is why we were telling you not to panic and freak out with Brandon Aiyuk in the first month of the season. It takes a few weeks for a lot of these teams to figure things out and how they're going to spread the ball around, and with Aiyuk not playing and not practicing at all in the preseason, really, I think, impacted his performance in the first month of the season. Now you're starting to see him really, really take off. This is very encouraging, very excited to see what he does for the rest of the season.
Caleb Williams had his best game as a pro, and DJ Moore was one of the main beneficiaries of that. He had 5 catches for 105 yards and 2 touchdowns, leading to 25 fantasy points in half PPR leagues. If you're a DJ Moore owner or a Caleb Williams owner, honestly, you're really excited about this development. But if Caleb Williams continues to get better, it's going to be also good news for guys like Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. Obviously, DJ Moore is still the wide receiver 1 in Chicago, but things are looking up if Caleb Williams can continue to step forward as a rookie this year.
Yeah, and Drake London and Darnell Mooney combined for dang near 60 points as well. Both of them, 27 points apiece, 13 targets for London, 16 targets for Darnell Mooney, and what really ended up being a shootout on Thursday night between Tampa and Atlanta. Kirk Cousins looks like he's back to his old self. He's starting to be a lot more comfortable in that offense. And heck, even Kyle Pitts actually had a productive day as well, which was encouraging. But with Drake London and Darnell Mooney was a great dart throw, a great shot to take in the later rounds. You're feeling really good if you really went and took him in those rounds in your draft before the season started. And then with Drake London, if you drafted him in the first round, this is what you wanted to see from him. I think both of these guys are on the up rest of the season.
Jamar Chase, you had a vintage Jamar Chase performance today from him, right? 193 yards and 2 touchdowns. And he did have 10 receptions to T. Higgins 9. T. Higgins also had a lot of points. He had about 30 points. These guys combined for about 60 points. The difference obviously being T. Higgins had 83 yards compared to Jamar Chase's 193 yards, which is, again, a testament to what type of player they are. Jamar Chase is obviously going to be a big yak guy. He's going to score a lot of his points on big plays. You saw those big plays manifest themselves today. Now, if you drafted Jamar Chase, you're feeling pretty good about your team. He's won you a couple games now, 2 weeks in a row. So I know my Jamar Chase teams have won 2 weeks in a row now. So feeling pretty good about Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, who hadn't really done anything so far yet this season after coming off the injury, but he looks like somebody that could be really promising for your fantasy teams the rest of the season.
Joe Flacco is just straight up a better quarterback than Anthony Richardson. It's not even a question. You've seen it immediately now. 2 straight games. Josh Downs and Michael Pittman were both productive. Josh Downs, really the main recipient of all the target volume there. He gets 12 targets in this game against Jacksonville. Hauls in 9 for 69 yards, which is super, super nice. And half PPR formats, that's flexible. And full PPR, you're feeling really, really good about that production. Pittman salvages his day with a touchdown, and Alec Pierce has another 20-point day play. I mean, 3 different wide receivers in this offense that combined for 50 or 45 points with Joe Flacco at the helm. This is something where it's going to get really loud in Indy, and you're going to hope from a fantasy perspective that Joe Flacco continues to be the starting quarterback so that Pittman and Downs can keep doing this week in and week out.
One of the biggest storylines this week was, Rhamondre's not starting. He got benched. Guess what? It didn't matter. I hope you didn't bench Rhamondre Stevenson because of that, because he had 17 points and a touchdown today against the Miami Dolphins. And Rhamondre, I think, is somebody, like, when you look at the team investment in Rhamondre, I wouldn't be super worried about him moving forward. I guess if after this game you wanted to sell Rhamondre high, you could think about it just because you don't believe in the offense as a whole. But for me, again, I think this is Rhamondre's upside. And if you have him in your flex spots, you feel pretty good about that. Don't ever listen to a benching. When you go and give you a running back, especially a 4-year deal, and you bench him, he's probably still going to be productive for your fantasy team.
Chuba Hubbard's production is on a downward trajectory, kind of like Carolina since they started Andy Dalton, but 25 points in week 3, 20 points in week 4, and 15 points in week 5. That's not a negative against Chuba Hubbard. That's just saying, honestly, pretty dang impressive that he's been able to do this for 3 straight weeks in a horrible situation while Andy Dalton falters. He's still able to transcend, gets just under 100 rushing yards, gets some receiving work as well. Not any yardage, but I mean, he gets 4 receptions. So in PPR formats, that definitely matters. With Chuba, he's definitely looking downward for the rest of the season with Jonathan Brooks coming in, probably going to eat into his workload. But if you own Chuba through the first, month and a half of the fantasy season, he's been really, really helpful and a nice flex option for you as well.
Tyreek Hill still wasn't Tyreek Hill today, but he was more Tyreek Hill than probably last week. Get this. He hit 6 of 9 receptions for 69 yards. That is a nice
ultra
stat
nice
line. That's the nicest, I think. So
got robbed of a touchdown too.
Exactly. And so Tyreek actually looks like maybe he might somewhat produce. Tyreek's not somebody that I would sell. More on that later, but it is encouraging to see him do something of note while he doesn't have Tua as his quarterback.
Yeah, and Brian Thomas, this was very, very predictable that he was going to be able to do this against, again, the Colts secondary, where Jacksonville as a whole drops 37 points. Lawrence looks pretty dang solid, and Brian Thomas gets that huge 85-yard receiving touchdown, 8 targets, 5 receptions, 122 yards. Again, you're not going to see this every single week with Brian Thomas, but he's definitely been one of the bright spots in week 5 with all of the rookies across the NFL. Obviously, you've got a lot of injuries and bye weeks. Brian Thomas, one of the few guys that was playing and was very, very productive. Great to see this again. Now, back-to-back weeks, 18 points and 20 points. He's becoming really a must-start every single week.
Even though the Bills trailed almost the entire game, James Cook was actually still productive. And so you take that away, he had 82 yards and a touchdown. He also had a couple of receptions. So he had about 16 points in half PPR leagues. It's good to see the Bills get back to giving him the ball a lot because I think he is capable of producing from a fantasy perspective. You also saw Keon Coleman in that game. And one thing I want to note is really without the touchdown, Keon Coleman is not productive again. And so and honestly, people thought Keon may have stepped out. It counted on the fantasy stat sheet. That's all we care about. But in terms of moving forward, Keon Coleman might be a sell high after this week.
Yeah, and Darius Slayton goes bananas. I laughed out loud when I saw his stat line. 22 points, he gets a touchdown, gets like 10, 11 targets, something like that against Seattle. This is not something you're going to see every single week. I think everyone has seen enough of a extensive sample size from Darius Slayton since he came into the league that this is not going to happen every single week. You obviously had Malik Neighbors injured. Definitely worth noting. It was impressive production and a tough matchup against Seattle, but not happening again. So Darius Slayton one-off. Did
Tyrone Tracy take the job from Devin Singletary? This is a pretty big deal. 18 carries, 129 yards, a reception. Tyrone Tracy had 13.5 points in half PPR leagues today. Now, we're going to see when Singletary comes back how they end up splitting that backfield, because you also saw Eric Gray getting a fair amount of work today. But again, Tracy was the productive back, and he outcarried him 18-4 today. So I don't know. You tell me. Do you think it's Tyrone Tracy's job now? Tyrone Tracy is going to be one of the hottest waiver pickups of the week. We'll talk about him a little bit later, but this is a big deal in fantasy football.
Tucker Kraft was a low-key, sneaky, solid start against the Rams this week, and boy, did it pay off. He had 23 points off of only 5 targets, 4 receptions, but he had a big play, I think a 60-yard reception from Jordan Love, was able to turn it into a touchdown. He got a second touchdown as well. So obviously there's some touchdown volatility that you can't rely on every single week. Luke Musgrave has been injured, but he's seeming to transcend and be the top option for Jordan Love at the tight end position. position, and where in a landscape that's just completely bare and completely disgusting, Tucker Kraft is looking like a guy that you're going to want to rely on every single week at the tight end position.
Josh Jacobs did the unthinkable today. Josh Jacobs scored a touchdown. We're all rejoicing as Josh Jacobs fantasy managers, and he had 16 points today. I feel a lot better about this. We projected Josh Jacobs to get better as the season went on, and as Jordan Love came back, and we saw that today. So if Josh Jacobs can keep getting touchdowns, we're going to feel a lot better about his fantasy upside moving forward.
I'll tell you what, the Rams were down early. This was kind of a game plan that was not built for Kyren Williams to be productive, and he was productive anyways. He gets 15 points. He gets his goal line carry. He gets a touchdown, has over 100 rushing yards, gets a reception as well. Like, Kyren Williams is one of the most consistent running backs in fantasy football when he's on the field. This was really nice for a lot of fantasy owners of Kyren Williams to see, again, in a game that wasn't built for him. He was still able to be productive. He's Kyren Williams. What else are you going to expect from Sean McVay? He's going to run him into the ground until he can't anymore. It's his job. No one else is going to eat in that workload.
So the first game we saw, well, not the first game we saw, but effectively what you have to note here is Brock Bowers and Jacoby Myers are going to be a lot more fantasy productive now that you don't have Devontae Adams in the field. Obviously, you have the QB situation, which is a little bit shaky there. But in the game without Devontae Adams, you saw Brock Bowers get 12 targets, including that sick catch that he actually ran back for a touchdown. But he caught 8 of those for 97 yards. Brock Bowers is him. Brock Bowers, after this week, I don't know. I don't know how the stats are going to sort out. He's going to be a top 2 tight end again after the week. His boom games because
Goddard's on a bye.
Yes, exactly. His boom games are nuts, but 12 targets for a tight end like that. A tight end as versatile as Brock Bowers. Oh my gosh. I hope you have Brock Bowers on your fantasy team because he looks like he could be a freaking league winner this year. Yeah,
I'll tell you what, I would not have traded him to you if I'd known that Devontae Adams was not going to be a Raider a month into the season. That kind of ticks me off, but whatever. The last guy that we're going to have here is Javonte Williams. He had actually a solid day, again, in a very friendly matchup against Vegas, who just continues to get worse and worse, but he gets some nice receiving usage. 6 targets, gets 50 yards in the receiving game, and gets 13 carries for 61 yards on the ground as well. Again, no touchdown, but still manages 13.5 points. This is interesting for a guy that has really just been kind of disgusting production-wise through the first month of the season. But in one of Denver's better games, he was able to be productive in a offense overall that's pretty disgusting from a fantasy perspective. So encouraging from him. But again, if you've got any takers that are overreacting about Javonte Williams and his receiving usage, I'd probably look to sell him.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's move now to the rookie report, and these are going to be our top 5 performing rookies of the week. Obviously, we talked about Brian Thomas Jr. playing a Colts secondary where you knew he was going to do this, right? And so he's going to be our top performer of the week. And honestly, we put Brian Thomas on a video this week and said, hey, you should go buy Brian Thomas Jr. This is looking like a pretty good decision if you actually did that. And so he's going to be the first guy. Second guy, obviously, Tyrone Tracy. Again, if he takes the running back 1 job there, that's going to be a pretty significant development. Brock Bowers as well, again, could be a league winner, 12 targets today. Really good stuff. Caleb Williams, again, he is looking better, and he's a rookie, so you have to be patient with him. And if he does continue to get better, then it's going to be better for your fantasy team all around, right? He's going to be elevating those wide receivers, and that's a big deal because there's a lot of fantasy talent in Chicago if Caleb Williams can perform. And so he's going to be on this list, and I'm glad he's finally on this list. And then Bo Nix. And Bo Nix, after last week, didn't really do hardly anything, had a much better game today. Broncos offense is still a little bit shaky, but again, you mentioned Javonte Williams. Bo Nix also had a pretty good game. And so those rookies stood out a lot this week, and I hope you have those rookies on your team.
Not as many injuries this week, but the ones that happened were incredibly impactful. And again, I feel like it gets worse and worse because it's not like guys getting re-injured that have been struggling with injury for the first couple weeks of the season. It's just more people that you have to add to the list. Everyone at this point in fantasy football is hurting and suffering. Aaron Jones ruled out with a hip injury. This is something that, again, is dated back to a couple years ago where Aaron Jones he is incredible when he's on the field. You know that he's going to get banged up. It's just how much will he get banged up and when is he going to go down? It's week 5 of the season, hip injury. It sucks. Hopefully it's not long-term. Devon Achane ruled out with a concussion. What did you expect? He's tiny. He's already been injured like 1.5 times this season. Nico Collins ruled out with a hamstring injury. This is something you're going to want to monitor for the rest of the season because he was a game time decision just a couple weeks ago with a hamstring injury. He has had hamstring issues in the past dating back to last year. And this is something that could potentially linger. We do not like hamstring injuries for wide receivers. And in a situation that's built for Nico Collins to be hyper productive, crazy. He dropped like 16 points, even though he missed more more than half the game because his big playability is unbelievable, but that's something you're going to want to monitor. Xavier Legette leaves with a shoulder injury. Says after the game he'll be good for next week. How much is that going to matter in an offense that's horrible? We don't really know, but he did show some flashes in week 4. Zach Moss leaves late with an ankle injury. This just means more workload for Chase Brown. That's encouraging for Chase Brown owners, discouraging for Zach Moss owners who know the history of Zach Moss injuries. Again, this sucks for him. Hopefully he can come back quickly, but I bet you he's going to miss a couple games from this.
All right, let's move to our waivers portion of the video, and let's start with our number 8 waiver priority of the week, and that's going to be Erick All, tight end. There aren't a ton of tight ends you feel really good about in fantasy football right now. Trey McBride, Brock Bowers, one of the few, Travis Kelce, I guess, without Rashee Rice. But Erick All, the reason that you could pick him up off of waivers in deeper leagues especially is because he actually outsnapped Mike Gesicki today for the first time. He's trending in the right direction. If you've been paying attention to the Bengals situation at all, you know that Erick All is somebody they believe in, they feel very strongly about, and he's somebody that could get involved, I think, as early as this year. And so he's going to be our deeper league waiver pickup. Again, you're not going to be probably spending any of your budget on him. You're probably not going to be bidding anything, and just maybe if you have an open roster spot, you need tight end depth, he's going to be somebody you go pick up.
Xavier Hutchinson is the definition of a vacated volume guy, right? Nico Collins goes down. You're expecting in future weeks, if Nico Collins misses a game or two, he's going to be the next man up and he might get some workload, which is fair. Even with Nico Collins being out for half the game this week, he only had 3 targets. You'd obviously expect that to go up as they, game plan expecting Nico Collins to be out for an entire game. But with Xavier Hutchinson, I think he's very limited overall. He's going to be our 7th priority here because I think his upside is just minimal. You're going to have Joe Mixon coming back. They're probably going to run it a lot with him. You've got Stephon Diggs, obviously, and then Tank Dell. Expect some big games from Tank Dell if Nico Collins misses some time. He might even continue to be a buy low because he had not a super productive game with Nico Collins going out in the middle of the game. This was a matchup that was tough against Buffalo. I think you're going to see more productive weeks for Houston even without Nico Collins. And Xavier Hutchinson is just going to be like the 4th option there. So if you can get him for very, very cheap, like 2 to 5% of your waiver budget, go for it.
Another tight end with some upside is going to be Colby Parkinson. Obviously, Colby Parkinson's been a guy we've mentioned on the show so far this season. He's kind of had on and off games, honestly. This happened to be a game where you saw a lot of guys get a lot of targets in that Rams offense. And Colby Parkinson, the difference between him and Erick All and why we'd give Parkinson the advantage right now, in waivers especially, is because Parkinson is the number 1 tight end there already. And he already has that spot locked up, and he has a ton of upside. He's rostered in 38% of sleeper leagues. Again, you're either not placing a bid on him or anywhere from 2 to 5%, but probably not placing a ton of money on Colby Parkinson. I guess if you need a tight end, you could be a little bit more aggressive there, knowing that Colby Parkinson could be a high-volume tight end option rest of the season if you need the tight end depth.
Yeah, and Ty Chandler is really going to reap the benefits of Aaron Jones being out if he misses some time as well. He will be our 5th priority, though, because you saw a really, really solid workload from Ty Chandler in the New York Jets game in London. And yes, that's a stout defense, but he still only had 30 yards off of 14 carries, and he was not getting a lot of receiving usage. Once Aaron Jones was out of that game, they weren't just doing everything with Ty Chandler that they would have done with Aaron Jones. There's a reason they brought in Aaron Jones to begin with, because Chandler has his limitations. Now, I'm hopeful that this volume can turn into some red zone goal line opportunities for Chandler in future weeks if Aaron Jones is out, but I think there are more exciting options here that we're going to talk about after Chandler that probably have some higher upside opportunity long term.
All right. You know that it's a pretty decent waivers week when Jordan Whittington is our 4th priority. And yes, Jordan Whittington did have 10 targets today. And it's nothing against Jordan Whittington here. The first guy we have that's our waiver priority, he's just a guy that's like, if he's not on your he's not on a roster in your league, like, drop the freaking free agent budget to get him. The other 2 guys are running backs that could be starters. Jordan Whittington, the reason that he's a little bit lower for us than some of these running backs is because you do have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp potentially returning on this offense. And once that happens, Jordan Whittington is going to be a non-factor.
Irrelevant.
And so short term, maybe Whittington does project well. I have a hard time believing he's going to get 10 targets again next week. But again, when those guys come back, Jordan Whittington won't be as relevant. And so for that reason, we'll have him below these running backs. These running backs are going to be really important. Nathan, I'll let you start with the first one.
Yeah, Tyrone Tracy we touched on in the highlight section of this video, but he is incredibly intriguing. A guy that we had our eyes on before the season started, knew that running back room was going to be for the taking because Singletary isn't anything super special. He's a viable option, but anyone could, with an injury, be able to, go into that situation and be productive. Tyrone Tracy really capitalized on that opportunity. He had 18 carries, 129 yards, not much usage in the air, only 2 targets, but he finishes with 13.5 points without Singletary on the field. So when Singletary comes back healthy, are we expecting Tyrone Tracy to immediately be a start and, take that starting position away from Singletary immediately? No, probably not. But you might see some, split carries, and depending on who does more with less opportunity, they might get more and more opportunity down the line. And I think Tyrone Tracy could potentially be that guy. Eyes on him for the rest of the season for sure, especially in the next couple of weeks as Singletary is eased back in from this injury. But I'll tell you what, man, a really, really impressive showing in his first opportunity. And he really held off Eric Gray, who didn't even have a chance. And that was one of the biggest concerns with Singletary being out.
Yeah, and we put 15 to 20% here. If you do think he's going to take that starting job, honestly don't mind you being aggressive here, especially if you're a team that is 1-4 now, and you need the upside. You're essentially just taking shots in the dark. Maybe you dump 30 to 50% on Tyrone Tracy, thinking I think he's going to be the starter.
Yeah, I'd just rather spend it on Bigsby.
Well, I think I would too. Although I don't know. Here's the thing to remember. Devin Singletary did have some good games before he went out, right? And so
yes,
I think collectively
exactly.
that unit is just playing a little bit better right now. But as Nathan mentioned, Tank Bigsby, rostered in 31% of sleeper leagues. I have him on quite a few teams. I have him as my Travis Etienne handcuff, and I'm glad I do. We're going to dump 30 to 50% of our free agent budget on Tank Bigsby. And a lot of people may think this is irresponsible, but we are Colts fans, so we were watching the game. We watched the entire thing play out. And really what it came down to was Tank Bigsby's a better runner than Travis Etienne. And when it mattered, during winning time, they gave him the ball. They had him on the field. They did not have Etienne on the field. He outproduced Etienne again today. And you've continually seen his usage go up. He outcarried Etienne, right? And he obviously outproduced in fantasy Etienne as well. And so I think, look, what's the team investment they have in Etienne? He's on his rookie deal. What's the team investment they have in Tank Bigsby? He's on his rookie deal. This coaching staff, they don't give a crap. They don't give a crap. They are. If they hadn't played the Colts this week, I don't know if they'd still be coaching, honestly.
Facts.
The Colts might have saved Doug Peterson's job today. Shout out.
They tried to get away.
Shout out Chris Ballard and shout out Shane Steichen and all the guys there for
Gus Bradley, baby. Woo!
Gus Bradley. How could I forget him? So,
gosh.
Again, Tank is going to be number 2 here because number 1 should be rostered in your league. And if he's not, you're dumping probably everything on him.
Everything. Darnell Mooney is rostered in 66% of leagues. If he is, for some reason, on your waivers, drop it all. Every last dollar, it's worth it. Kirk Cousins' volume is legit. You just saw all 3 receiving options be productive there. And Bijan Robinson isn't taken away from him. So look, Darnell Mooney, dude, not only is he getting touchdown opportunity consistently, he's getting a ridiculous amount of volume. So number 1 option, 50 to 100%, like 100%. Go for it. He's our number 1 option this week.
All right, let's get to a couple buys for your fantasy team before we get to our buys video tomorrow. The first one here is going to be Breece Hall. Breece Hall, when you're looking at the last couple weeks, in the Denver game, you had the weather. And the weather significantly impacts running backs, right? And so would you remember, Breece Hall the first couple weeks of the season really wasn't that bad, right? So you have the weather game, right? The Broncos, obviously, the Broncos defense can be sneaky underrated at times, but you could attribute that to whatever you want to and just say, yeah, it was just a tough matchup for Breece Hall. It was a tough game, tough weather, whatever. And then you go to the Vikings, and the Vikings secondary isn't fantastic, but their run defense is fantastic. Really, really good up front are the Vikings. And so because of that, you're going to have a lot of people shorting Breece Hall because they're going to say, oh, okay, Breece Hall's not doing anything. He's worse with Aaron Rodgers. I think Mason said he was equivalent to Saquon and the Giants, which I think is a terrible take. But I do think that he is somebody you should be going and trying to trade for right now if you have people panicking. Again, in more competitive leagues, you might not have people panicking. In home leagues, people might panic, so see what you can send for Breece Hall. Obviously, you're going to be starting low. Start with those low offers and see how cheap you can get Breece Hall on your fantasy team. I still think he's a premier asset to have for your fantasy football team.
Yeah, and I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a pretty solid buy now as well. He was, before the production came, his breakout in week 2, 27 points. But really, since then, the 3 weeks after that, he's been pretty and that kind of dang near hit rock bottom against San Fran, where he only had 4.5 points. That's not what you're expecting from a guy that you drafted in the first round. Case in point, where you don't draft rookies in the first round of fantasy drafts. But with Marv, it's going to take a little bit of time still because he has been very touchdown dependent. This was the 1 week where he didn't score a touchdown and he didn't have a lot of production. That said, since his breakout in LA, week 2, 8 targets, 11 targets, 6 targets, 7 targets. That volume and opportunity isn't going down. He still is Kyler's number 1 option. And McBride coming back healthy, I think still is going to help schematically for Marvin Harrison Jr. to be open, to get that opportunity consistently from Kyler Murray. You're going to see better weeks than this. It's been just kind of a iffy last few weeks while they figure things out offensively.
And our last buy here is going to be Tyreek Hill. And with Tyreek, it's kind of like the Jaws theme song. It's like dun, and that's Tua like preparing to come back.
1 week closer, right?
Every week it's dun, and when
speeds up.
Tua does come back, what are you going to see? You're going to see Tyreek Hill have a 25-point game, 30-point game. He's going to be Tyreek. Tua's going to be Tua. The main reason is Tyreek also wasn't like completely unstartable for your fantasy team this week. He was still borderline. Like you're talking about flexible, right? 10 to 12 points, and so again. People are focused on right now. People will even look at today by Tyreek standards and say he had a really bad game, which by his standards, yes, he did. But again, right? Tua's going back. And so when Tua comes back, Tyreek's going to be a good person to have on your fantasy team. And he could end up being a league winner at the end of the year because his price is so low relative to what he could do for your fantasy teams during the playoffs. So there you go. The playbook, obviously done virtual. We figured it would still be worth it to get on and make videos for you guys. So drop a like if you appreciate that. And also make sure you're subscribed because I lugged all of my recording equipment to Florida so I could record virtually with Nathan from Indianapolis so we could get you videos this week. And so we'd appreciate it if our dedication paid off. If you would subscribe and drop a like for us. But lots to come this week. Make sure you keep an eye out for our videos tomorrow. Appreciate you guys so much, and we'll see you later.